So back on Thursday, we got the new update which had some changes to the weapons, giving some nerfs and buffs. And so I wanted to go back and retest my times for these 6 different classes which were most affected by these changes. Full disclaimer, this is on my character with the stats that I have available to me and the gear, and so I don't necessarily have a fully optimized build for each of those classes. But I also want to highlight and show you the results of the Tevent Orb and how this thing can actually be pretty insane to massively boost the damage output of curses and their explosions from wand. So we'll look at some testing and data towards the end of the video specifically for that. And potentially it can change up the meta. So we start with Oracle here. This is Orb and Wand. This makes use of the massive buffs that the wand got to its curses. So for testing, this is the build I was using with this skill setup, these Orb specializations and Wand specializations, Orb masteries and Wand masteries. And so with it, the best time we were getting on the dummies here was 29 seconds. Now yes, I do my dummy tests just killing a dummy over and over for like nearly 10 minutes. This allows me to continually damage the dummy and not break up the timing of the tests, and it also gives a more accurate representation of a real boss scenario where the fight lasts for an extended period of time. But keep in mind, you will be getting snapshots where sometimes within a minute you might deal a bit more damage than other times, just due to the nature of some burst damage of abilities. And so to more accurately look at this, we need to see the average amount of time. So we could just take that of all of these tests. Just keep in mind though, these are with curse explosion, meaning your damage over times get consumed. I found that it was a much better result with dark explosion, so we could remove these times. But our average ends up at just over 32 seconds with my setup. We're then going to look at Fury. Now this is where I believe I have the more optimal build, still far from max when we consider my ring doesn't even have good traits yet. I'm missing all that buff duration, skill damage boost. Similarly here, this needs some upgrades, along with missing the attributes from the wand, and we could get legendary armor piece as well with a ton more attributes. I do need to switch this rune over, and that gives us the 99 dex. But these are the skills I use here on Fury, with these specializations crossbow and wand, with the weapon masteries for crossbow and wand. Now I showed dummy tests just yesterday, I believe, on Fury, beating the dummy in about 28 seconds. And we even got a better time of that today because we used Nimble Leap a bit more, and I could find this neat spot which basically allows me to use Nimble Leap and not move anywhere. That basically gives you the big crit damage boost, and in a real boss fight you may want to actually use weak point shot if you're the only crossbow user there, which is highly unlikely considering the meta right now. But you can see my test results here. I'm pretty comfortable with these, and we were getting down to 26 seconds here, which is really good. So we can take the average of those tests and we're looking at about 31 seconds, which is a little better than Oracle. So now we jump to Crucifix. This is the usual setup I use in terms of gear. Again, missing a bunch of upgrades, particularly with buff duration. We go with this skill setup with these orb specializations and these crossbow specializations. I have these orb masteries and these crossbow masteries. Now I've done pretty much everything I possibly can to optimize my rotation and get the maximum advantage on a dummy test here, apart from using and abusing Wind Snatcher to get the weak point shot debuff, because you can totally do that. This applies a movement reduction, which allows you to apply Wind Snatcher bind effect, which would allow you to apply weak point shot with expanded conditions. I can do that on Fury too, but since all the classes would benefit from weak point shot when properly applied on a boss, I don't think it's too fair to include it in the test. But trust me, with the gear I have, I've pretty much done everything possible to optimize my rotation and get as much damage out of Crucifix. And we end up with these certain test times. And yeah, I even abused the 15% base damage artifact. This is a bit of a cheese, I know. But if we do take these average times, we were just getting about 31 seconds, with lows as far as 25 seconds to kill the dummy. Now yes, you may have seen people beat the dummy far faster, even as fast as 12 seconds. But this guy has quite a bit better stats than me, on top of having a lot better server connection. Mine regularly goes between 60 and 110. His, I believe, was 30. Which just means you take a lot more advantage of attack speed and can actually cast abilities much faster. So it is my hunch, combining his better stats, better base damage, and better server connection, that's why he can achieve those kind of crazy results. And yes, it may seem 25 seconds is quite a jump up from just 12. And that's also because if you aren't dealing all that damage within the first selfless diffusion, then you pretty much don't really do any damage until the next selfless diffusion, which is like a 19-second cooldown here. So you gotta wait all that time if you haven't done the 5 million in the first selfless diffusion before you can start dealing good damage again. Grobs also posted one of the very first tests on Crossbow Orb, beating the dummy in like just over 14 seconds. And he has since posted a bunch of guides if you want any assistance in playing this class. But for me, and with the gear I have, Fury can deal pretty much as good damage, if not better, when somebody's using the Tevent Orb. But let's move on to the next class. We have Enigma. This did get some buffs with regards to these staff improvements. Dummies are considered monsters. You can again see here the gear that I'm using, still missing quite a bit of upgrades and no legendary weapon, so missing attributes. But these are the abilities I use, and it is kind of abusing Mana Ball Eruption, particularly because you gain a pretty significant mana regen boost while in a safe space like the guild hall or a town. I use these specializations on staff with these on orb. In terms of masteries, my staff masteries are not the best, but in all honesty, there's not a lot of improvements. You could get this Power Surge, but that's such a minor max damage boost. It should barely affect these results, with these then being the Orb Masteries. So in terms of the time to beat the dummies here in my tests, my best score was as low as like 47 seconds. And you have to keep in mind, Enigma, because of staff, will deal more damage against bosses with Hellfire Rain versus dummies, because barely any of these meteors are actually going to hit the dummy because their hitbox are so small, which makes it really hard to gauge how impactful these classes are that use staff on actual bosses. But needless to say, you will feel you'll do more damage against bosses in reality versus these dummy tests. So you could take these times and reduce them by like 10, 15, maybe even 20 seconds on some staff classes. But if we look at the average time here, to kill a dummy was about 50 seconds. And keep in mind, the first test was using focused firebombs and the follow-up was serial firebombs. So if we actually remove all the focused firebomb tests, we're down to like 49 seconds. So I have found, yes, it can be better to use serial firebombs on Enigma, just because then this is 3 skill casts, which will help with your passives to cast more active skills. And just through the nature of having so many abilities to cast, you don't really have a lot of time to spend charging up focused firebombs. But we can move on to Invocator. This is still a really solid class and did get pretty big boost with regards to the staff damage improvements and the wand curse improvements. In terms of gear, this is what I usually go with, and I did test using, say, 2-piece Brute Slayer instead of 2-piece Sacred. We'll get into that. You could switch all your defense runes over to max mana, and you could potentially get a little bit more of a damage boost, at least for burst damage. But again, mana regen will help for more mana ball triggers. In the staff masteries, I don't use heat fusion here. I switched it over to this and actually got power surge. So we end up with these abilities, with these staff specializations and these wand specializations. Damage output here has definitely been improved, as I can really beat these dummies quite a bit faster. My best time was about 47 seconds, and this was using the Sacred set with the Magic Circle. I did try with the Brute Slayer set and the Decaying Touch, meaning you'd use this one here. But basic attacks can give you that already, so it can be better off having the Magic Circle, and then you have those 3 different damage over times 4 including Tevent. So if we do look at the average, that was like 53 seconds, but we can remove these times which were a bit longer, since I wouldn't recommend then to use Brute Slayer or Decaying, and you actually end up with 52 seconds. So finally, we'll look at Battleweaver. We have this gear set up here, we use this skill set up here, with these crossbow specializations and staff specializations, and then these masteries for crossbow and for staff. We do switch over to heat fusion because we actually want to remove those burning sticks so then we can gain all that cooldown by reapplying them. But I would ultimately say I don't find this class too effective. But this is again mainly due to Hellfire Rain. You're not getting that damage against the dummies from it. And that really hurts Battleweaver because you're taking advantage of all this extra cooldown, allowing you to actually spam Hellfire Rain a ton more often than any other class. You combine that with the Della's Noah staff, and that's where Battleweaver really shines. This is when it can do a ton of damage and why it can be a very competitive class in boss fights. But you will not see that damage reflected on dummies whatsoever. Because again, Hellfire Rain is just super poor here. And so the whole kit of Battleweaver just doesn't work on dummies. You cannot use a dummy test to properly gauge how effective Battleweaver actually is. We need DPS meters for that. So what this means in terms of these changes is that Oracle, Fury, and Invocator got a significant boost in damage. We can see my old tests, so this was prior to the change. This was the full test data and then the times we were getting, and you can compare 48 seconds down to just 32 on Oracle, from 50 seconds down to 31 on Fury. And these again are average times of these tests. Crucifix stays about the same. We could just not include the cheese and we'd be around, 33 seconds. I don't think it has really changed for me. For Enigma, I am getting slightly better times. We did get some staff buffs, but I would also say my rotation has improved a bit. For Invocator here, yes, some definite improvements from 76 seconds down to just 52. Again, because of all those curse improvements and some staff buffs. And finally, Battleweaver. Again, we can't really take any of this data to really be properly representative of the class because of how that Hellfire Rain works. But finally, I want to look at how this Tevent Orb could potentially change up the meta. The effect doesn't look too impressive, but you have to be aware. It can increase debuff durations by 8% per stack up to 5 times. That's a whopping 40% extra debuff duration on the monster. And this works on bosses too. That means any duration effect, any curse, is going to last 40% longer. So my Tevent is now going to last upwards of nearly 50 seconds here, just due to this effect. That's versus my normal 34 seconds, due to it having usually 30 seconds, plus 3.3 here, and another 1 second here. So Tevent, when your monster has all that debuff reduction, now lasts a whopping 48 seconds, which I can boost by another 5 seconds if I use Witching Hour. And since this reduces the enemy's stats, as we've tested with other abilities, that means everybody attacking the target gains this boost. So this is going to be particularly impactful for a class like Fury, where pretty much all their damage comes from those damage over times. The only exception is going to be Touch of Despair, because for some reason its duration can't go beyond 15, it's a hard cap. But Corrupted Magic Circle and Decaying Touch, which you get through this, along with the Tevent as we showed, get their durations massively increased, meaning a ton more damage on those explosions, which is pretty much the main source of damage on Fury. I've done a comprehensive breakdown here for Fury and its damage and how it works, and if we increase the durations as you see here with the Tevent Orb, 40% increase on those. Tevent is now 48 seconds as we just confirmed in game, and it would deal over 21% more damage versus a build without this buff, without this duration increase on the monsters. And if the orb were to be upgraded to this, it's now 60%, meaning Fury will have durations up to like 55 seconds on Tevent's Hunger. That's going to be nearly 60 seconds here with Witching Hour, and it's over a 31% overall damage increase to Fury. So just looking at these comparisons, imagine another 30% increase to this and our damage would be looking crazy good on Fury. In terms of actually improving the Oracle's own damage, the person who uses this orb, my tests so far have been a bit inconclusive. I did at one point get 30 seconds here, but I'm not too happy with these results. Potentially I need to improve my rotation to make the most of this effect. And also potentially using the Sacred set and not the Brute Slayer set. So I will do more testing after this video, and if I get any crazy good results, I'll be sure to post like a YouTube short and probably a follow-up video later with some explanations. So ultimately what all this concludes for me is that I'm pretty happy playing Fury, Oracle and Crucifix. On my builds they're about the same level in damage. However, I would say if you're starting out and you want kind of an easier build to play between those, it's going to be Crucifix. I also found it works better in groups because you're going to have this satellite copy, meaning you create all those other party members as satellites, which means more stellar dash, which means more rift fractures, meaning more cooldown, and overall it just combines to make Crucifix pretty much the best to use in a group setting. And so despite these dummy test results, Crucifix does appear to just do better than these. I go to field bosses and Fury just seems to fall behind, but I go to dungeons and holding threat on Fury seems to be very doable against a lot of crossbow and orb players, which would lead me to assume that I'm dealing more damage than them. Fury is also just easier to play, you don't need to spam abilities as much, and Crucifix can just be more dependent on, yes, your server connection, having that attack speed to actually be able to spam those abilities really quick. We don't know though how long that will last, but the Korean devs have posted that they'll be on holiday next week and there will not be any maintenance, which very likely means the same for us on global, with no update, no change to the current balance of these weapons. And keep in mind again the gear that I'm using on them. With me testing Crucifix, I'm not using the legendary orb versus what others may use. And for Fury, I am using the legendary wand. Same for Oracle and Invocator. Ultimately, if you are playing Invocator right now, I wouldn't bother switching to Enigma unless you really just want a playstyle difference. The damage isn't that much since we've just had a pretty big buff to the wand side of things. And otherwise, Fury is really expensive. You need to have Tevent and even Belandir to make it properly work. Crucifix, you can get away with a budget option. You don't need this Belandir crossbow. You could actually be better off with Lucian's right here with the better attack speed and stats, as you don't need the extra weaken from Belandir. But Belandir's getting a buff, so I won't be switching to Lucian's, and I'll just see how much of a buff Belandir gets later this month. On a last note, I'd like to give credit to Lucky Black Cat for initially testing the Tevent Orb and posting his findings, as that could lead me to obtaining it myself and testing it for PvE and how effective it is here. I will do more testing on it, as I mentioned, particularly with Oracle, but it is just a huge support effect for any curse users in the group. Like if I'm Fury, I totally want my healer using the Tevent Orb, maybe even a tank or just another Oracle DPS. That would boost me massively. But once again, thanks for watching. A special thank you to these channel members, and we'll see you guys around.